Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my very great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Antony Jenkins. I doubt we could have found a more appropriate individual to address the annual Chartered Banker Banking Education Conference. For those bankers in the room, you'll know Antony best as the former Group Chief Executive of Barclays PLC. Educators in the room will know him best as Chair of the new Institute of Apprenticeships, launched in spring this year. But perhaps most relevant to our focus on future banker capability today is Antony's role as founder and executive chair of 10x Future Technologies, which has as its mission creating a new banking ecology, one that's more diverse, open and fair, which touches on many of the themes of our earlier sessions. That will clearly require new skills, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing, new ways of banking, exactly what we're discussing today. So we all look forward to what you have to say. Antony.
Thanks and good morning everybody. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about the work of the Institute for Apprenticeships and the importance of quality apprenticeships. But before I do that, just a sort of couple of personal anecdotes from my rather long career in the industry. I began my career in 1983 as a graduate trainee, but in those days everybody started working in a branch, and I started working in the branch of South Kensington. I used to spend my mornings filing statements and copy statements in alphabetical order, and most of my afternoons sort of sorting out post. But actually, it was a great experience because you do learn what customers want, and you learn how important it is to serve customers and make them happy. But you also learn what upsets customers and how to deal with that. But in those days, Barclays, I started at Barclays, recruited only about 40 graduates a year. And the rest of the folks came through what was essentially an apprenticeship system, a combination of on-the-job training, off-the-job training provided by the bank, and then professional qualifications provided by what was then the Institute of Bankers. I left Barclays in 1989 and went to Citigroup, worked there for 17 years, 13 of which were in the United States. When I returned in 2006, there were people in the very upper echelons of Barclays that had come up through this route. So it was a very viable, credible route for creating capability at every level in the organisation. A few years later, one of the HR directors in the business I was responsible for came to talk to me before I was Group Chief Executive and said she had this idea to create an apprenticeship programme at Barclays. And I thought that was a very interesting idea. We started off focusing on the NEET population, and we quickly discovered that the young people in that population were there not because they were lazy or feckless, but because there'd just been some life circumstances which had put them in a very difficult position. And frankly, I think if any of us had had those same life circumstances, we might very well have been in that position. And we started off, I remember saying to the HR director, how many of these do you think we can do? And she said, well, we might be able to do 200. And I said, well, I think that's ambitious enough. We've got 1,600 branches, let's shoot for 1,600. And by the time I'd left, we'd done over 2,000 apprenticeships. Started off with, that sounds very similar to the Metro programme, but now Barclays has apprenticeships across almost every area of the bank. I saw some ex-colleagues last week, and they were from internal audit. We've got apprentices in internal audit, we've got apprentices in legal and so on. But when Barclays did this work, it was very interesting to me exactly the power of an apprenticeship. So obviously it affects the learner, but it also affects the people around them, their families, their communities. And Barclays also found, and still finds today, as do most employers, that apprentices are incredibly loyal colleagues. They value being given the opportunity, they're committed to the organisation, and they tend to progress well through the organisation. So it's really a win-win for everyone. And when I was approached about doing this, I really was passionate about it because I saw the effect of it on the people that I'd worked with at Barclays. And as I've talked to people across the whole economy now, in different sectors for transportation, food manufacturing, high-end engineering like British Aerospace or Rolls-Royce, everybody has a passion for this topic. Apprenticeships offer great opportunities for people of all ages to get the skills they need to progress, to improve productivity in this country, and to act as a powerful driver of economic growth and social mobility. As you know, one of the great things about everybody living longer is we're all going to be working longer. And it's unlikely that the skills that you acquire through your secondary and possibly tertiary education will sustain you throughout your whole career. So the notion of continuous learning is very important. It's clear that to prosper on the world stage following our departure from the EU, we will need to invest in world-leading apprenticeships, technical and professional education, to improve skills and to drive productivity. The government's ambitious agenda of skills reform has over the last year gained extraordinary momentum, including the successful launch of the Institute for Apprenticeships on April the 1st. Now, it's worth us saying as an aside that this country has, for at least 50 years, and some people would argue for 150 years, attempted to create a viable system of apprenticeships and technical education. Successive governments have failed to achieve this for various reasons. We often look enviously at systems like the German system, the Swiss system, the Scandinavian system, and I'm quite often told about the merits of those systems. My comment is they're very good systems, but we're not Switzerland, Germany or Scandinavia. So we have to make something that works for the UK. But I believe that we have a unique opportunity with the establishment of the Institute to really drive this capability forward for the first time. Now, I'm sure you want to know how apprenticeships may help support the development of future banking workforce, given the many financial, regulatory and technical challenges that are shaping the industry. I smile because I remember them well from my days of Group Chief Executive. The Institute is very aware from talking to many financial institutions that there's lots of traditional ways of recruitment, primarily of graduates. And it's always been a competitive marketplace. Financial services have been attractive for graduates. But it's also true that graduates don't always come with the required knowledge, skills and behaviours for competence. And the apprenticeship programmes offers an alternate method for recruitment, a great promoter of social mobility and diversity, and opening up routes into financial services for people for whom university has not been a route for various reasons. Now, we all know that banks have traditionally been, certainly on the retail side, volume employers, and that there has been career progression inside banks and other financial institutions, but this represents an enhancement to that. I'm also aware that you'll want to know how apprenticeships in banking can align with, support and further encourage the industry's momentum to enhance and sustain higher professional standards. Now, one of the important elements of the new regime is external quality assessment, and this strengthens the quality assurance of the apprenticeship, both for the apprentice, for the employing organisation, and of course for professional bodies that are involved in apprenticeships. Currently, there are over 535 apprenticeship standards that have either been published or in development. 39 of these are in the legal, finance and accounting route. The Institute has, in the last 4 months, given permission to develop new apprenticeships for a Level 6 Professional Economist, Level 5 Professional Internal Auditor and Level 2 Accounts Assistant. In November 2017, we have published the much-awaited, it says here, Apprenticeship in Accountancy, Level 7, and Insurance, Level 6, and both these standards are now live. So the apprenticeships are not just about entry-level jobs. These are Level 6 degree equivalent, Level 7 post-degree level qualifications. The Institute has approved standards and assessment plans for a Level 6 Senior Financial Services Professional and a Level 7 Investment/Commercial Banking Specialist, Level 3 Motor Finance and Level 7 Actuary. These are all currently in the subject to feedback phase, and we're working very closely with the trailblazers so that assessment plans can be published in the very near future. Now, just a word about the architecture that underpins this new approach to apprenticeships. One of the key differences between now and the past is that the Institute is what's known in the government space as an NDPB, or non-departmental public body, which means that we are independent from government, and our responsibilities are basically to ensure the quality of apprenticeships through three means. The first is to approve the standard. Now, the standard is the document which describes the knowledge, skills and behaviours that the apprentice has to acquire in order to complete the apprenticeship. And we approve those standards through a system of collaboration with trailblazer groups and using 15 root panels which have been appointed to review and approve the standard. We also then make a recommendation on funding, also somewhat confusingly one of 15 funding bands. We make that recommendation to the Department for Education and the Secretary of State, and we also provide quality assurance of endpoint assessment where there is no other body to do that. It's fair to say that the Institute has the qualities of a startup, but it's a startup inside government. So we pulled together and inherited numerous different processes from different parts of government, and we worked incredibly hard, really since the summer of last year, to get ready to launch the Institute in April. At its core, the Institute is employer-led, which means that employers get to determine what apprenticeship standards there should be and what knowledge, skills and behaviours should be reflected in those standards. That does not mean that employers get everything they want. Clearly, employers are a diverse group. It's not just about the private sector. The public sector is a huge employer. It's not just about large businesses. It's also about medium and small enterprises. And what we are attempting to do in the Institute is, through these standards, clustered across 15 different root panels representing different occupations, to create an integrated structure and taxonomy around the standards themselves, so that when you as an employer are looking for an apprentice in a particular type of work, you can go to the Library of Standards and find one that's appropriate. Again, the trailblazers themselves are feeding into this. We've got the root panels overseeing this. We have an excellent board with a very diverse representation of employers, large, medium and small, public and private sector. We have over 2,500 people from employers involved in the work of the Institute. Now, it's fair to say that when you set up something from scratch and you inherit a lot of processes, that not everything works perfectly on day one. Currently, it is taking approximately 13 months to approve a standard, but you will be aware that that is an average, and so there are shorter times than that and longer times than that. We are doing a very large piece of re-engineering to look at collapsing that cycle time. That will involve running parts of the process in parallel as opposed to sequentially. And the two elements that we're looking at right now is the funding process and the endpoint assessment process. And so we think over time we can begin to collapse that cycle time. The second thing that we are doing is working very hard on digital. We were excited to launch our own website a couple of weeks ago, and we will be increasingly digitizing our processes so that things can work more speedily and in a more modern fashion. The other thing that we're working on is technical education. You will be aware that the government has announced a new qualification called T-levels. There's a lot of policy work going on about T-levels in the Department for Education at the moment. We will have a role in the establishment and administration of the T-level system. As of yesterday, the first component of T-levels, which is basically a set of occupational maps built around each of the 15 routes, have been brought into the Institute. So the Institute now curates those maps so that we can build an integrated system of professional and technical education for work in that taxonomy of 15 different occupational routes. And the idea is that an apprenticeship will be mostly work with a training component, as you know, minimum 20%, but the T-levels will be mostly training with an element of work experience. So how these T-levels are rolled out and how they sit in the overall universe of qualifications is still policy work that's going on. To conclude, I would say that based upon my own experience throughout my banking career, I think for the finance industry, apprenticeships represent an exceptional opportunity to bring highly motivated, bright people into the industry and to do it in a way that works for them and for their learning and development styles, but also works for the employer because, as I said, based upon my experience at Barclays, you end up with highly motivated, excellent colleagues. The Institute itself, as I said, is new. Like any new organisation, we're dealing with a number of issues, but we are through the period of what I would regard as mobilisation, and we're now into acceleration. Looking back over the past, as I said, there have been many attempts going back to the 60s to achieve a viable and effective system of technical education in this country. I think we have a real shot at it. It's not going to be easy, but we have a real shot at it. And there has never been a time when that has been more important. If we think about the challenges that our economy faces, whether it's to do with highly rapidly changing technology, which is impacting this industry as much as any other, whether it's the changes that the country will go through as a result of Brexit, whether it's the social issues of inequality and the need to promote social mobility, the productivity challenge that the country has, all of these issues are incredibly important for us, for our children and our grandchildren. We need to get on the right side of them, and the Institute can play a very valuable role in that. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. We have about 10 minutes for questions for Anthony. Before I take some from the floor, I thought it might be appropriate just to see if any of the apprentices in the room would like to ask a first question. If you don't, that's fine. But if you do, that would be particularly appropriate. Would any of the apprentices like to ask a question to Anthony? If not, one of the older apprentices around here. We're all still learning. Jim.
Thank you very much for that fascinating speech. Get my teeth in. Jim Devlin here, Dean of the Business School at the University of Nottingham. I think it's fair to say in the traditional university sector there's a fair amount of ignorance and scepticism, not necessarily justified. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how we can best help you in your mission. What would you be looking for a university like Nottingham to do in this space?
I think there's a number of universities that are enthusiastic about this type of education because particularly at level 6 and some at level 7 can create programs leveraging all the organizational capability and expertise that you have developed as an institution. So what we're looking for the higher education sector to do is engage actively with the institute and with employers to build these programs. One of our board members, Fiona Kendrick, is the chair of Nestle in the UK and Ireland, and she's done a wonderful program with, I believe it's Aston University, for degree level apprenticeships. So I think it's opportunity for the higher education sector, and I'd encourage you to engage with it and make the most of it, because we need the provision to be there for these high level apprenticeships.
Steph, do you have Steph? Oh, sorry. Okay, Matthew. After. We'll take Steph. Yeah.
Hi, Mikhail Down from Banking Standards Board. I was interested in what you were saying about the link between apprenticeships and loyalty, and the loyalty that an apprentice would have to their host organisation, which absolutely I can see is a significant benefit both to the organisation and to the apprentice. But of course, loyalty also does have some risks in terms of being able to spot things that are not quite right, or feel able to challenge where something is not right. Whether it's an improvement to processes or whether it's something that is unethical. What can we do, kind of working with apprentices, to equip people really with the skills to be able to call out things that are not comfortable? And by the way, this is a point that's relevant, I think, to pretty much any walk of life and not just banking, as recent events have shown. How can the apprenticeship scheme more broadly equip people with the tools to be able to do that throughout their, not just at the start of their careers, but actually throughout their careers? And is there more that can be done in this respect?
Yeah, it's an important and vast question. One of the other things I do is chair business in the community, which is all about promoting responsible business. And when I was at Barclays, I did a lot of work on cultural change there. You know, I always believed at my core that doing business in the right way is not just the ethically right thing to do. It's also the right thing to do from a business point of view. You know, if you treat your customers decently, they'll come back to you. You know, if you play by the rules and create value for shareholders in the right way, that benefits you in the long term. And if there's one industry that proves what happens when you don't do that, it's financial services, because 10 years after the crisis, there's still a litany of regulatory and legal issues that are being dealt with, which have been incredibly expensive for shareholders, highly distracting for bank management, dispiriting for employees, and bad for the reputation of the industry. So, that's where I start from on this. I believe that actually the ability to combine work and learning is a very good way of helping people develop the experience and instinct to know when things are right and when things are wrong. Almost all my core beliefs about banking started when I was working in a branch, when customers were coming in with a problem. And often it taught me a few things. It taught me, one, that people really don't like dealing with their money. It's usually scary and boring for them. And that if you could solve that problem in the right way, you could create a great thing for the customer, and it was great for the business. So I think this sort of combination of learning and earning is very powerful to give people the right instincts to spot when something's right or wrong. There's a separate question about the culture of organizations, and is that supportive in allowing somebody to raise their hand and say, no, that doesn't smell right. That product wasn't right for that customer. We were too aggressive in terms of doing this, that, or the other. So apprenticeships can be an important element of solving this problem, but really it is at its heart an issue for the leadership of these organizations. Leadership sets the culture inside an organization. Culture drives performance. And I'm very familiar with the work of your organization. We were big supporters of it when I was at Barclays. But it's a gargantuan challenge because the industry is frankly, I don't think, completely cleansed of the behaviours and culture of the past. And that needs to change. Because it'll either change because the banks change, or it'll change because people will change the banks. And so far it's been more of people outside changing the organisations, I think. Steph.
Okay, so I just want to ask, so more and more employers are now thinking about going to the employer-provider route, but we see more and more times that people are always kind of falling into the employer hat or training provider. So as an employer that is falling into both, in terms of the institutes, what's their aim in terms of supporting those routes there? Because it's really important that you are doing the quality assurance and that they are set up. But in terms of an employer provider, that support would be, really, really helpful in making sure that we are creating sustainable opportunities out there for the apprentices.
Yeah. One of the things about this world of apprenticeships, I naively thought when somebody came to me and said, "Will you chair the Institute for Apprenticeships?" that it was everything to do with apprenticeships. in the world of government, that is not the case. In fact, if you look at every body that's involved in apprenticeships, it took the officials 8 closely typed pages of A4 to describe how the universe of different bodies involved in this works. So the issue that you're specifically referring to is addressed by the ESFA, but I don't take that as something which is not sort of absolves us from having an opinion or a responsibility to it in the Institute. So one of the things with what we're doing in the ESFA, approving training providers, whether they're employer or third party, is they have to pass the appropriate standard and they have to be regulated by some body. Often that is Ofsted, but not always. So the Ofsted regulation is what quality assures the provider. But because we have this highly fragmented landscape around different bodies involved in the provision of apprenticeships, we've created, under the leadership of the Institute, something called the Quality Alliance. And we bring all these bodies together and we look at what's going on across the whole sector, and we try and spot areas where things aren't working appropriately, because we need to make sure that training provision is of the highest standard, whether it's provided by employers or third parties. And the same is true with endpoint assessment. We need to make sure that that's of the highest standard as well.
Okay, have we got time for one final quick question at all? Is that a question? Yeah, Matthew, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Anthony, for the insight. Ian Gallagher at Santander look after emerging talent, which includes apprenticeships. One of the challenges we face, and just give your insight around this, is the devolved nation topic.
Yes.
It's just what role do you have within that, and any influence around that? Because it's obviously, with being a UK-wide employer, it's very hard to do UK-wide apprenticeships.
I understand. And to be clear, the Institute for Apprenticeships only applies to England because this is a devolved power. So it is implemented in different ways in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Frankly, we don't have any direct control how those organisations and those nations decide to spend their levy, which is the key to it. But we are talking about what we're doing and sharing different approaches. But I recognise that is quite frustrating if you're an employer that operates across the United Kingdom. Again, this is not how you would design a system if you had a clean piece of paper, but it is the system that we have, and we need to make it work in the best possible way we can.
Great, thank you. Anthony, are you able to stay around for a while, or you're dashing off? Because I know we have a panel session next with comprised of, I know Ian, you're going to be on, and some of the heads of learning and development from the banks are looking at apprenticeships. So it's a shame you can't stay for that. But could I say, thank you for your insight. I was particularly struck by the way you started off talking about your own experience starting a branch. That's something we hear from many of our senior members and fellows at the Institute about the importance of understanding that banking is fundamentally about money. You start counting the cash, and it's about customers who come in, and you have some great customers, you have some difficult customers. And it does worry me that as banking becomes ever more driven by technology, we lose that connection with money and with customers. I think one of the great things that apprenticeships can do and are doing is almost bringing some of that ethos back, that you start at the bottom and you work your way up. And I know that won't always mean working with customers, it won't always mean working with cash, the world has changed, but it will help bring some of that ethos back. Anthony, it's been a pleasure having you here. Thanks for your insight. Please show your appreciation.